Hey guys, welcome back to another video of Frosty Explain. This is the series in which you will see what happens if Ash never gets a Pikachu, but he gets a Dragon type as his starter. That's Dratini, obviously our pseudo legendary first evolved form of Dragonite. So how will this change the whole story? Well, today's episode we will be going to the SSN safe. And the fucked up thing happens every fucking time we goes there, so we still like fools, we go there. So let's go there. And if you're new on the channel, please subscribe, turn on the bell icon, and without any more delay, we should begin this episode.
Ash's Pokemon's names: Dratini M. Kaiser, Charmeleon M. Ignis, Pidgeotto F. Ava, Ralts F. Tia, Mankey M. Trooper, Kabuto M. Helio. This had been a very pleasant surprise. Stephen Stone was over a year older than Ash and hence had begun his journey before him. Ash had a lot of questions for him. Which Pokemon had he caught? What experiences had he had? How many gym badges had he won? And what was he doing in the Kanto region? After all, he was from Hoenn, and the last time they'd talked, Ash remembered Stephen had told him he'd be traveling around his native region first, participating in the local Pokemon League. He was the son of a business tycoon from Hoenn, and heir to one of the biggest business organizations in the world, the Devon Corporation. Yet, unlike his father, Stephen's interests lay elsewhere. His obsession with Pokemon ran almost as deep as Ash's. The guy loved Pokemon and battling with them just as much as Ash. Although, unlike Ash, he had another hobby he liked to indulge himself in. Ash's lips curved into a bright smile as he strode towards the friend whom he hadn't seen for years now. "You're in the Kanto region," Ash asked as he reached the boy. Stephen was dressed in an expensive-looking suit, comprising a purple shirt, jet black coat, and black pants. Ash thought his clothes complemented him well. As far as he remembered, Stephen had always dressed well. One wouldn't need to look at him twice to figure out his prestigious background. Stephen stood up straight from the port railing he was leaning against. As you can see, he smiled and raised his hand to grasp Ash's. It had been a while since Ash had done that with Stephen. Far too long, in fact. "It's really nice to see you after so long," Ash chimed as he pulled Stephen towards him, playfully nudging the boy's shoulder against his. His eyes locked deep with Stephen's, and stayed that way for a long moment. "The last time we talked was almost 2 years back, wasn't it?" Stephen chuckled heartily and nodded as Ash released his hand. "Yeah, and a lot's changed since then. I can tell," Ash sniggered, slipping his hands in his pockets. "We've both become Pokemon trainers, for one. I tried calling you some time back, but I couldn't find you home." "It's been almost a year since I started traveling and I've not been home much since then," Stephen answered. Ash nodded. The word home reminded him of his mother. He grimaced when realization struck that he hadn't even called home in months. And after his mom had told him to be in touch regularly, too. He mentally noted to call her first thing after returning from the SS. "Anne," he brought his attention back to Stephen. "Been looking for stones?" Ash laughed. Stephen's obsession with stones took him back. In their younger days, Stephen would always bring up something related to rocks in their chats. Ash had tried very hard to understand Stephen's meticulous explanations about his hobby at first, but he'd given up after he realized that it was far too much for him since he knew next to nothing about them. Ash's passion and endearment on the topic paled in comparison to Stephen's, for he couldn't even identify a pebble from another. "I would be lying if I said that I haven't done that." The trainer from Hoenn shrugged, earning a sneer from Ash. "There are a lot of caves and dungeons that I've been to after I started traveling. And stones weren't the only thing that I found interesting there." He put his chin up and whistled. His sapphire orb stabbed into Ash's meaningfully. "Maybe we should go exploring together sometime." Maybe. Ash rolled his eyes after momentarily breaking off his gaze. He didn't want to get Steven riled up about stones now. Once he began a thesis on them, it would be difficult to get him to stop. Steven noticed Ash's sigh and groaned. He didn't appear too pleased about Ash's lack of interest in what he considered to be one of the most fascinating things in the world. So, he changed the topic. But I've mostly been trying to focus on my Pokémon training recently. The Hoenn League's right around the corner. Now, the talk of Pokémon training got Ash's mind driving into more interesting avenues. The Hoenn League, Ash mused as he gazed into Steven's eyes. He felt jitters in his stomach whenever he thought about the Pokémon League. How long until it starts? It's only a couple months away, Steven answered. Knowing you probably have all the badges you need, Ash said, unable to hold off a grin. Steven grinned right back as he drew out a rectangular, metallic case from his jacket. The assortment of stones attached to the box glinted vividly when exposed to the sun's rays. Ash couldn't help but gasp at the beautiful craftsmanship of the equally dazzling stones on the surface of the box. As far as Ash knew, and he thought that he knew Steven well, Steven wasn't one to flaunt his wealth. And he had plenty of it, but he didn't hold back with spending it on the things he loved. The blue-haired trainer pressed the box lightly, making it open. Ash's eyes sparkled at the sight of the 8 differently shaped badges that the case held. Those were 8 authentic gym badges that would allow Steven to participate in Hoenn's regional conference. Ash clenched his fists at the thought of having 8 badges of his own. He couldn't wait until he did. A whisk of adrenaline pumped through his body in anticipation. How strong would he be then? Which Pokémon would he have encountered? The great battles that would inevitably happen before he reached that point thrilled him to the bone. That's awesome, he chirped, a little too excited, but straightened himself soon enough. There was something else that he was curious about. You're here for training then? Steven nodded, his features full of glee. Yeah, since I have all 8 badges already, I decided that it wouldn't be a bad idea to go to someplace new, he smirked, flicking a tuft of his teal hair. And I wanted to see you again, Ash. We've not seen each other since we became trainers. Ash snickered at the words of his friend. Same goes for me, Steven. I'm glad to see you after so long. His eyes narrowed and he felt a spark rush through his body as he instinctively flickered his Pokeballs with his hands. We've gotta have a Pokemon battle. I've been waiting for you to say that, Steven said, equally as interested, but then pointed his gaze towards the ship behind him. But we'll have to wait a bit for that. We can't battle here, but there's a lot of battle arenas on the ship. The mention of the SS made Ash remember something. He instantly turned his head and smiled wryly at Brock, who'd been standing a couple feet behind him. He wrinkled his nose at how he'd forgotten about Brock. Hey Brock, this is Steven, a friend of mine. He glanced from Brock to Steven. And Steven, this is Brock. He was the Pewter City gym leader, but we've been traveling together for a bit. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Brock. Steven smiled at the aspiring doctor, taking a few steps forward and extending his hand. The pleasure's all mine, Brock returned the smile as he firmly shook the offered hand. The boarding's open now. Steven glanced towards the dock again. Ash followed his gaze and found several people gathered up around the stairway to the SS. And chattering and joking in small groups just like them. He hadn't realized how noisy it had gotten around the dock. It's still a while before the departure time, but we can talk inside. Ash glanced at Brock and nodded. Sounds good. Soon, the 3 trainers made their way towards the dock. A queue had already formed before they got there with a myriad of people. Most of them young trainers had started the procedure to get in. Between security, tickets and identification, it took several minutes before they boarded the ship. Welcome to the SS, Anne. We hope you have a wonderful time with us. A well-dressed man politely greeted them after they climbed the stairway to the ship's entrance. Ash smiled at the man and strode inside, and Steven and Brock trailed after him. "So, how's Gary doing?" Steven asked as he paced himself towards Ash. "He was doing fine until the last time I saw him. Dunno what kind of mess he might have gotten himself into now." Ash sneered at the thought of Gary. Life looked like a breeze for Gary, without any problems, but Ash could affirm the uncertainties surrounding the Pokémon Journey from his own experiences. He turned around to Steven, who'd taken a few quick strides to catch up with him. He said he was going to board the SS, and before it was delayed, so we should find him here. "I hope I do run across him," Steven said with honest excitement. "It'll be interesting to see how strong he's become too. I had a battle with him in Cerulean City." Ash started before his forehead creased at the memories of that battle. Fresh images of his loss surfaced, but the result hadn't bothered him. "A one-on-one battle. And?" Steven asked curiously. It was difficult to see he was interested. "I lost," Ash admitted wryly. He didn't mind saying that he'd lost that match, even though it was at a disadvantage for him. He'd have to make sure to settle the score the next time they fought. Letting Gary get over his head with victories would be a pain to deal with, one that nearly gave him a headache at the mere thought. Steven chuckled. "It was a one-on-one battle, so it doesn't prove much." "I guess," Ash said dryly. "And you're not telling me the whole story now, are you?" Steven smirked as his shoulder bent towards Ash's, a nudge getting a guilty chuckle out of him. "As much as I hate to admit it, I lost fair and square," Ash shrugged. "He's probably gotten a bit stronger by now. Don't worry, I'll beat him next time," he affirmed confidently. "And what about Leaf?" Steven asked. "She's traveling too." "Ah, Leaf." A tinge of worry filled Ash's heart when he thought about her. She wasn't clumsy, but she had the tendency to be quirky. He hoped she was doing okay. Had she decided what she wanted to do? "Yeah, Leaf started with us, of course." Ash gave him a half smile, but Steven probably noticed his apprehensions from the odd look he shot at him. "That girl, I wonder how she's doing now. I haven't seen her since I left Cuter City." "You worry too much about her." Steven laughed and grasped Ash's shoulder reassuringly. Ash could tell. "She's certainly more sensible than Gary, and even you. She used to keep you and your friends in check, remember?" Ash blinked at the last part but dismissed the thought that Steven was taking a jibe at him. "That was Gary's job." "Well, yeah, I sure hope she is." He scratched the side of his eyebrow. "She doesn't want to challenge gyms." Steven frowned. "That's surprising. She did great in that part of the training, and she was pretty set on following you and Gary." "She said she found out that she didn't like battling as much as she thought," Ash replied. "It's good that it happened early though. She can find out what she likes to do and just go with that." "Well, that is a bit disappointing, I won't lie." Steven grumbled and grimaced for a brief moment, then his face brightened. "But I hope whatever she chooses works out for her." Ash hummed at his words. They'd walked to the door of the main hall of the ship. And to say the sight impressed Ash would be an understatement. The hall was gigantic, at least 100 meters if not more, Ash noted. The ceiling seemed like it would dwarf a few floors of a normal building easily. Beautiful red carpet rolled throughout the floors with the walls painted a glittering but clean pearl white. Ash couldn't imagine how many people it could hold at a time. He could see various small shops at either side of the hall. There weren't a lot of people in there yet because the boarding had just started, but Ash was sure it would brim with people before long. The crowd he'd seen outside would be all here. On the side opposite to where they'd entered from, there were a few battlefields. "So, they make the Pokémon battles a spectacle," Ash mused as he glanced at them from afar. counting 4, 2 on each side. They looked like standard training battlefields from there, hard, even ground without any grass covering on a slightly raised platform above the floor around. Those aren't the only battlefields there are in SS. N. Brock chimed in. It's got some special rooms which are almost like mini gyms. They have bleachers for people to come and watch the match and trained referees too. And that's not all, if what I've read is correct, Stephen added brightly. There could also be some competitions. There are also some training rooms for Pokémon, and different kinds of them. They're also reinforced so Pokémon can train without having to worry too much about damaging stuff. But it's still advised that the training be done with some caution. The three of them strolled through the hall, glancing at the different shops that had just begun to open. Ash's gaze danced through the multitude of shops, his thoughts enchanted by the delicacies, Pokémon food and Pokémon accessories that he laid eyes on. The SS. Anne was true to its reputation, a top-class cruise liner. Finally, they made their way toward the battlefields. The 4 fields were each next to one another but with enough space for a fair amount of spectators to stand in between. Ash awed at the size of them, unable to hold a gasp. He hadn't been able to make out from afar, but each one of those fields was around half of the size of one in a Pokémon gym. SS. Anne continued to impress him. He glanced around all of them and found a couple already had Pokémon battles going on. He was sure trainers would pack the area soon. Let's have a battle here, Ash, Stephen suggested as he walked towards the far end of the battlefield nearest to them. Ash smirked at him. He'd been waiting for this. Yeah, he took his position at the trainer's box near him. And we'll use our very first Pokémon to battle. Of course, Stephen grinned, pulling out a Pokeball. It was an unusual mix of gold and silver colors from inside his coat. Let's enjoy ourselves. Ash unclipped a Pokeball from his belt and pointed it forwards. Yes, Kaiser, you're up. Both trainers let out their Pokémon from their balls, a Metagross materializing on Stephen's side while Kaiser shrieked his arrival. The 2 Pokémon roared at one another, piercing glares unmoving from their foes. The silver-colored Metagross towered over Kaiser's size several times, but the dragon type didn't show a slither of weakness. He snarled, fierce eyes unwilling to bend even against a foe that oozed strength. Your Beldum evolved, Ash mused at the sight of the massive steel-type Pokémon. Even from afar, Ash felt the power emanating from Metagross. Its claws glimmered with a faint hue of purple that vanished soon, but that was unmistakably a tiny speck of its unimaginable psychic abilities. It regarded Kaiser with an empty, cold stare, then cast its eyes on Ash. He felt his body freeze for the briefest of moments when Metagross had looked at him. That sent a shiver down his spine. The steel and psychic-type species were known for their especially sharp intellect and powers of deduction that far surpassed human levels. Ash had seen Stephen's Beldum when the guy had called him nearly 2 years back. The reason for the call had been to show Ash the Pokémon he'd received from his father, a different-colored Beldum. Ash would be lying if he said that he wasn't jealous that Stephen had gotten a Pokémon before he'd even started his journey. He'd told Ash he'd encountered it in one of the caves he'd gone to with some employees of the Devon Corporation. It had caught his interest, but he wasn't a Pokémon trainer at the time, so he had to rely on others to help him catch it. It had escaped the first time, but after he'd told his father about it, the businessman had sent some high-level trainers to capture the Iron Ball Pokémon for his only son. It's not been long since it evolved into Metagross, Stephen said proudly, as he flicked a tuft of his hair. His features seemed to gleam when he looked at his Metagross as if an old man gazed upon the most precious prize in his lifelong collection. I'm surprised to see that your first Pokémon was a Dratini. I thought you were going for a Charmander. Yeah, but some things happened and I ended up with this guy, Ash grinned as he remembered the events that led to him getting Kaiser. The slew of emotions that he'd experienced that day, from disappointment to exhilaration, still chilled his spine. And now, I wouldn't have it any other way. It wasn't easy to raise Pokémon like Beldum. Some species of Pokémon were naturally stronger than most others, and raising them well proved a task that few could endure. Kaiser, being a Dratini, was the same way. These Pokémon were rarer to find and demanding to raise. They were a rarity even among more experienced trainers. That applied even more for their fully evolved form. Steven must have gone through a lot of harsh training to get his first Pokémon to evolve into a Metagross. The two Pokémon, a different colored Metagross and a Dratini, drew hushed whispers and stares from the nearby crowd. Barely a minute had passed, yet a crowd of boisterous spectators had gathered around the battlefield. "That's a Metagross from the Hoenn region, isn't it?" one boy in the crowd chirped. "Wait, its color is different," another yelped in surprise. "My Pokédex shows its color is blue." "Amazing," a girl in the crowd chimed, awed at the Pokémon on display. "That guy has a Dratini," a slightly older boy, probably in his late teens, exclaimed, pointing his finger at Kaiser. "Both of them have such rare Pokémon." Ash shook his head at the ruckus. A large crowd had already gathered around him, blocking his view from all angles. And more people seemed to be joining in. He shrugged at the reception. That wasn't surprising, considering there was a Dratini and a Metagross, an unusually colored one at that, on show. Ash brought his attention back to the battlefield. "Should we begin?" Receiving a nod from Steven, he glanced at Brock. "Do you mind acting as the referee, Brock?" Brock smiled. "Sure, I'll do that." He walked in the middle of the field, which had a box drawn on the ground for a referee. 1-on-1, when Steven and Ash both affirmed, he raised his hands and shouted, "Begin." Kaiser, start with Dragon Breath. Ash commanded, taking the lead. He'd noticed that Kaiser had been unusually excited for this battle. Ever since he'd sent him out, the dragon hadn't stopped hissing and growling at his massive opponent, undeterred by the humongous size difference. "Iron Defense," Steven ordered, sliding his hands in his pockets. As Kaiser charged his Dragon Breath, Metagross's silver body glowed for a couple of moments as it roared and straightened its metallic legs. The Dragon Breath pelted Metagross on the face dead on. However, the iron-legged Pokémon barely gave more than a light shriek, waving it off as if it had been a splash of water. "Its defense is amazing." Ash narrowed his eyes as he tried to study every visible move Metagross made. The iron defense had improved its defense power, but not being affected by Kaiser's Dragon Breath. That wasn't something he'd seen any Pokémon he'd faced so far do. "Try Aqua Jet, Meteor Mash," Steven said calmly, pointing his hand forward. His every move seemed measured. A whirl of water surrounded Kaiser as he flung himself at Metagross at great speeds. Metagross' right hand also glowed a shade of golden, but before it could do anything else, Kaiser had already tackled it with his Aqua Jet. Metagross yelped, but it continued its Meteor Mash toward Kaiser, who remained within immediate striking distance. "Quickly use Dragon Breath on Metagross to move back," Ash yelled, and Kaiser proved just about fast enough to fire the greenish draconic energy at his foe, the force of which sent him flying backwards. The Meteor Mash didn't strike him, but it was only a narrow dodge. If Kaiser had been a moment too late, the glowing fist would have crushed him under its sheer force. "Kaiser is pretty fast," Steven complimented with a smile. "I'm impressed at how well Metagross can take Kaiser's attacks," Ash chimed back. "It's easily the strongest Pokémon I've battled so far." "That's a big compliment coming from you," Steven chuckled before his eyes gleamed. "But you'll see Metagross can be quite fast too." "Bullet Punch. Dodge it with Aqua Jet," Ash cried out instantly after he'd heard Steven. Metagross whizzed past the battlefield as one of its legs glowed again. Kaiser had surrounded himself in a thin veil of water, but the strike from Metagross was far too quick for him to do anything about. He wailed in pain as the force of the attack slammed him to the ground, tumbling a few feet before its trainer. Ash grimaced at that. That bullet punch wasn't just fast, it was extremely strong too. In one blow, it had done more damage to Kaiser than he'd done on Metagross the entire battle. This also made him realize that he needed to teach Kaiser something to counter steel types. Dragon-type attacks weren't very effective against steel-type Pokémon, and even though Aqua Jet wasn't a terrible choice, it was a move focused on speed rather than power. In a battle against a Pokémon as mighty as Steven's Metagross, that wouldn't be enough. Kaiser's moveset needed work. Shock Wave, Ash ordered without wasting another moment. He had to take the offensive if he was to stand a chance. Flash Cannon, came Steven's counter. Kaiser shrieked and unleashed a wave of electricity in the direction of Metagross, who charged a ball of silverish energy in its mouth. It didn't attempt to get out of the way of the shock wave, instead taking the hit and shooting the silver beam of energy at Kaiser. The Dratini slid out of the way of the flash cannon and roared, but that roar was cut short because another flash cannon was scurrying his way, and there was nothing he could do to evade it this time. Ash gritted his teeth as he saw Kaiser crashing backwards again. His starter tried his best to get back up, but he didn't seem to have enough power to do so. Ash sighed. Kaiser may have been strong, but he wasn't strong enough to take on Steven's Metagross. Not yet. He pointed his Pokeball forward and Kaiser got covered in a flash of light, but his eyes widened when Kaiser remained on the field, despite the red light from the Pokeball surrounding him. He'd rejected being recalled. Kaiser, Ash mumbled.